All right, guys, we're going to talk about the most disappointing player from every position in the league for the 2025 season. We're going to fill out this beautiful fantasy baseball lineup, a catcher, a full infield, four outfielders for the most disappointing guy at every single spot. I tried to keep injuries as far removed from these conversations as possible. Sometimes they do seep in, but also just because players might have been hurt, but also sucked while they were not hurt. Really, again, it's just who was the most disappointing, mostly injuries notwithstanding, because you can't do much about guys getting hurt. And I want to start out one of the most disappointing players from this baseball and fantasy baseball season, shortstop Mookie Betts and the Dodgers. It was really just a season from hell for Betts. It was a big deal for him to become a better shortstop defender this year after moving basically full-time to the position last year, so he spent a lot of his offseason work as a shortstop, focused more on that besides the hitting. And then when his Dodgers went to Japan to open up this season, he contracted a horrible virus, lost 20 pounds. Then when he started to recover from that, he broke his toe in a game in May. By the end of the season, he had just a 256, 326, 406 triple slash line, the lowest OPS by far of his entire career since he became a regular player, with just 20 home runs and 8 stolen bases. If you guys have Mookie Betts on your teams this year, you definitely spent a first round pick on him. If you got those numbers from your first round pick, you were very, very disappointed. It's probably very hard for you to win. All that being said, Mookie did really pick the nose up through the last 2 months of the season. He had 800 OPS in the second half, and he's already started off the playoffs red hot. I think Mookie Betts will get back to being Mookie Betts, because that's who he is, Mookie Betts. But this past year, he may have ruined your season as a first-round pick. Now, keep jumping around here. I want to go to second base, complete the middle infield. And the most disappointing guy there was Marcus Semien, the Texas Rangers. It just became very clear that he got old. It looked like he was getting old last year, and then this season, as it went along, seemed like most of the talent was just sapped. He's now had 2 straight seasons with an OPS below 700. His bat speed was never very good. Now it's getting worse. His quality of contact was never very good. Now it's getting very bad. And it's crazy because even heading into this year, I think a lot of us gave Semien the benefit of the doubt, just having the long, really productive career that he's had. Still in a Rangers lineup, we expected to be very good, and he just had this completely horrible season again. And to make matters worse, he was heating up through June, a little bit in July, kind of got cold again in August, then fractured his foot, ended the season a month and a half early. Just a total disaster season for Marcus Semien. Now let's head back up the roster to catcher, the most disappointing catcher this season, Yainer Diaz on the Houston Astros. In most drafts this year, Diaz was being taken ahead of Cal Raleigh. You guys know what happened in Cal Raleigh's season, right? And Diaz was objectively just awful this whole season. He had a 253, 282, 408 slash line. That's disgusting. The 19 home runs didn't preserve his value in any way, shape, or form. Didn't make any strides defensively either, where he's still one of the worst catchers in the league behind the plate. And with that bad defense, no hitting production, only a 690 OPS, that kind of puts him on the line to actually be considered a bona fide starter as we head into next season. Coming into the year, there might have been arguments that Yainer Diaz was a top 2, top 3 catcher in dynasty formats. Now this year, you're going to next year, I don't even know what the Astros are going to do with that position. Also, while all this has gone wrong, he still swings at some of the highest percentage of pitches out of the strike zone of any hitter in baseball. Pitchers this year realized they never had to give Yainer Diaz a strike to get him out. He saw one of the lowest percentages of pitches in the strike zone all season, and they feasted on him for that reason. Without an adjustment from him, I don't know what his future looks like at this point. Also have an honorable mention here, catcher JT Realmuto. It's just sad that it's all over. The best fantasy baseball catcher for this era, the best catcher probably for this era, it's just the end of the prime. Happens to everybody. He got old. That's what it is. Salute JT Realmuto for a great 10-year prime. Now heading to first base, the most disappointing player there, Christian Walker and the Astros. Just such a terrible season. Really high hopes for a guy like Walker, who's a dead pull hitter, heading to Houston and the Crawford boxes, where you thought a right-handed pull hitter would just totally flourish there. And it really never happened. He got hurt in spring training, strained his oblique, and never really got on track at all any point this season. There was a decent second half, but it still couldn't exactly save the stat line and save what we spent on him in drafts. He did have 27 home runs, which is good, but an on-base percentage under 300, a 718 OPS, and that was for a guy who the last 3 seasons had an OPS over 800 and was hovering near the 30 homer mark. His bat speed also fell down a tick, which you can see that for a guy who's getting older in his mid-30s. But at the same time, it did seem like there was a bit of an obsession with this pull-happy mentality. And that was the player that Christian Walker always was. So when you're pulling, you're getting out in front of the ball. You're making contact with the ball out in front of the plate and you're pulling it. But with the bat speed going down and him still trying to get out in front of everything, that's how all of Christian Walker's whiffs and strikeouts just went through the roof, and that made him not a very productive player. He kind of represented this weird soft zone in the middle of drafts last year after the elite first baseman like the Bryce Harper, Freddie Freeman, who also had very disappointing seasons, but not as disappointing as Walker. After those guys, Vlad, Pete Alonso, but then before you get to the lower ranked first baseman, who wound up being the guys with the value, like Josh Naylor, Vinny Pasquantino. Walker was that guy in the middle you could count on, and he had a really disappointing season. Really couldn't count on him at all. Pop over now to the other corner with the most disappointing third baseman in in baseball this season was so easily Mark Vientos on the Mets. Heading into the year, he was being drafted ahead of, or at least in the exact same tier as Junior Caminero, the superstar 22-year-old on the Rays who had 45 home runs. Vientos did seem like he was ascending after he took over the Mets third base job last season, had an amazing postseason, kind of carried that Mets lineup to the NLCS along with Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso, and then got the third baseman job heading into the season this year and was a complete disaster right from the jump. By the end of the season in real life, he was barely playable. When Brett Baty got injured in the last weekend of the season for the Mets, they put Ronnie Mauricio in at third base, who had played like 2 games in the last month because they did not trust Vientos whatsoever in the field. His glove is that bad. There's really a good chance he never plays for the Mets again heading into next season. They're probably going to have a lot of changes, but by the end of the year, Vientos had 17 home runs, a 702 OPS, and a 289 on-base percentage, which is just terrible. And that happened in nearly 500 plate appearances. Mark Vientos had more plate appearances in 2025 than 2024, which is crazy to think about. And on top of that, those 17 home runs that he hit 8 of them in August alone. So basically all the production he had came in one hot month when it seemed like he was kind of getting himself back together, but really it was just a dead fish bounce. When you look at ESPN standard scoring by the end of the season, Mark Vientos was outscored by Jonathan India, who was terrible for the Kansas City Royals, Brooks Lee, who doesn't really have a tool to speak of, Lenny Sosa, who kind of came out of nowhere for the White Sox, and Josh Young, who also got benched in real life by his Texas Rangers. Also, he was outscored by Miguel Andujar, who had 120 fewer plate appearances than Vientos. Just an all-around catastrophic season from a guy who I don't know if he'll ever have the trust to be a big league starter again. Moving to the outfield, we got a lot of disappointing players, starting out with Jackson Merrill on the Padres. He dealt with a lot of injuries. He had a hamstring, he had a concussion, but even with all of that, it just wasn't even nearly the same level of production he had during his rookie season. The thing that made Merrill so interesting, kind of so cool as a player, was this crazy aggressiveness that he had, this very high swing rate, but also with the aggressiveness, the ability to barrel pitches up kind of all over the strike zone. It did seem like a bit of a tenuous skill set, but you're like, wow, this guy's such a super athlete. The hit tool's so amazing. I believe it's going to work. The problem is, it just did not work. He was pitched much more carefully once the league kind of realized how good of a player he was. He had a lot more pitches on the edges, a lot more pitches in the shadow of the zone, kind of just outside the strike zone, making him make those difficult decisions. And his uber aggressiveness, still swinging all of those pitches, made his quality of contact shoot down like a rock. He did not hit for the same power, way fewer home runs, and he still never developed the wherewithal to kind of take those pitches in the shadow and on the edges more often, so he could wait for the mistakes in the heart of the plate that he could punish. That wound up kind of being the thing that destroyed Merrill, and I think he kind of played catch up with himself as he got through the second half of the season, wanting to contribute because he did miss a good chunk of the first half with those 2 injuries. He started swinging harder, started whiffing more at those pitches again, still on the edges in the shadow, and the whole thing kind of dissolved in front of our eyes. He also stopped stealing bases. As a guy who was taken the top 30, top 40 of most drafts, he didn't even return top 50 outfielder value. Really terrible. Next, we have Mike Trout. We've been saying for years in the fantasy baseball world that if Mike Trout can just stay healthy, he's still an elite player. We learned this year that's not the case because he stayed healthy for basically the whole season and he was nowhere close to being an elite player. He did have 26 home runs, which was great, but only a 230 batting average, a 798 OPS, which is good, but for Mike Trout, that's kind of unthinkably bad. And at the same time, he was swinging and missing a ton, especially at fastballs in the top of the zone. That became a problem spot for Trout. That's kind of terrifying. That tells me that the effects of aging are beginning to affect Trout. I don't really like thinking about Mike Trout aging. That makes me feel like I'm aging, which is true, but I really don't like to think about it. And he's another guy who, again, we thought if he could stay healthy, he'd be an easy top 20 type of outfielder as a floor, and he wasn't even a top 50 outfielder, and he played through the whole season. Now we have a pair of Pirates as the last 2 outfielders here. First up is Brian Reynolds. Always considered this kind of metronome. He had an 800 career OPS, always has home runs in the mid-20s, between 75 and 90 runs and RBIs, 10 or so stolen bases. The guy was just all reliable. But this year, none of that came to fruition. He still played upwards of 155 games, but he only had 16 homers, a 240 batting average, and just 3 stolen bases. Really, everything kind of fell apart. The fact that he did get to those 155, I think it was actually 154 games played, and did not even return top 50 outfield value is unthinkably bad for a guy like Reynolds we've come to rely on. And then the last one, this one's going to hurt me to say. If you guys have been riding with me the whole season, you know it. O'Neal Cruz, just really disastrous season. We still had the home runs and the stolen bases, 20 home runs, 38 stolen bases. Those are really cool. Those help you kind of retain some value, especially in 5x5 rotisserie category leagues. But having an exactly 200 batting average and 676 OPS is egregious. It's egregious from a statistical perspective because it's hard to build a really successful team with a guy like that taking tons of plate appearances for you, real life or fantasy baseball. But also from his perspective, with the physical tools that he has, as hard as he can swing the bat, as hard as he can hit the ball, as good this year as he was able to lay off pitches outside the strike zone. That did come from swinging less often in general, but again, it did feel like some of that was him identifying pitches. But then as we got through the season, it kind of felt like his focus was waning. He even made strides in center field, but also still had tons of bonehead plays out there. He's just not really a feasible player. It's kind of a joke that with his skills, he can perform this poorly. But all right, that's it. The most disappointing hitters in fantasy baseball. Thank you guys all so much for coming back and supporting the channel. I took a little bit of a break, a hiatus. Those late months, September, early October, people aren't caring that much about fantasy baseball. So I figured it was a good time for me to catch a break. During the offseason, you guys can expect probably video every week, sometimes 2 videos a week. I think that will be just what I'll tell you moving forward. Definitely 1, sometimes 2. And we are going to spend a little bit of time here looking back before we get ready to look forward. But even with that, I'm going to do the most disappointing hitters here, the most disappointing pitchers next, then the best, most surprising hitters and pitchers after that. Then I'm going to do something like the biggest lessons we learned from fantasy baseball this season. Then I'm going to sprinkle in some 2026 content, project the first round of 2026 drafts. And while that's happening intermittently, I probably will do some positional reviews. Just talk really deeply about every position. First base, second base, shortstop, third base, outfield, pitchers, relievers, everything. All that to just get us ready. So by the time we get to December, we're now beginning to look ahead to the 2026 season. But thank you guys all so much for being here. Thank you for coming back with me. Thank you for being here the whole time if you were. I'll see you next time.